Hey everyone, it's Professor Clark, and in this lecture we are going to go over the use of verbal aspect with Russian verbs in the past tense in a little more detail. Let's start by talking about the past tense with imperfective verbs. And imperfective verbs can be used with a number of situations in the past tense. One of the most common is when we are indicating repeated actions or giving the same meaning that we would have in English when we said we used to do something. So if in English you would say you used to do something, in Russian you're going to want to use an imperfective verb. And some key words that indicate imperfective verbs are много, a lot, всегда, always, часто, frequently, все время, all the time, каждый день, час, каждую неделю, whatever, so every unit of time. Обычно, usually. Иногда, sometimes or occasionally. Редко, rarely, so even if it's rarely, it's still a repeated action. В детстве, in childhood or as a child. And раньше, which means earlier, but is often used with these used to phrases. So for example, в детстве я много читала. In childhood, or as a child, or when I was a child, I read a lot. Я раньше много читала. I used to read a lot. And раньше means earlier, but we often use it here with imperfective verbs to indicate that you used to do something, that you don't do it anymore, but you used to do this a lot. Another situation in which we use imperfective verbs is when you are indicating the duration of activity, how long you did something for, especially if it is of long duration. And some key words and phrases that suggest that you want to use an imperfective are something like весь день, all day, все утро, all morning, всю ночь, all night, долго, for a long time, or if you have the number of time units. For example, я долго читал. I read for a long time. Я читал весь день. I read all day. Я 3 часа читал эту книгу. I read this book for 3 hours. And in all those situations, you're indicating process and continuous action. And so you want to use imperfective in all of these situations. Another situation where you will want to use imperfective verbs in the past tense is when you are asking or answering the question, have you ever done something? For example, вы когда-нибудь читали «Войну и мир»? Have you ever read War and Peace? Да, я читал «Войну и мир». Yes, I have read War and Peace. Or yes, I read War and Peace. And когда-нибудь means ever or something like that. And so we often use it in these questions of have you ever done something, but you don't have to. If you just have the imperfective verb in the past tense, it gives this meaning of have you ever done something? Because again, you are focusing on the process of the action and not the result. Another situation in which you are going to use imperfective verbs in the past tense is when you are asking or answering questions about how you spent your time, or your focus, again, is on the process of the action. For example, что ты делала вчера? What did you do yesterday, or what were you doing yesterday? Вчера я читала книгу и смотрела телевизор. Yesterday, I read a book and I watched TV. And in English, it's a little unclear whether or not you finished things here, but in Russian, we're going to emphasize the process and describe how you spent your time. So, я читала книгу, I read a book, or I was reading a book. There's no indication that you finished the book, just that you spent some time reading the book. The same thing with я смотрела телевизор. There's no indication that you finished watching your movie or your program, just that you spent some time doing so. And then another way that the imperfective is used is to indicate attempt, that you tried to do something. And specifically in some aspectual pairs, we have the imperfective indicating an attempt at the action and the perfective indicating success with the action. And a common example would be the pairs поступать, поступить, to apply or get into school, and сдавать or сдать экзамен, to take or pass an exam. The imperfective, поступать в университет, is to apply to college. And the same with the other pair I mentioned. So сдавать экзамен is to take an exam. There is no indication that you got in or that you passed the exam, just that you made the attempt. Now let's talk about the past tense with perfective verbs. So we're going to use perfective verbs as a general rule in the following situations. First of all, if we are describing a completed one-time action. For example, я купила хлеб и чай. I bought bread and tea. And you didn't just try to buy them. You didn't just go to the store and kind of walk around and think about buying them. You actually bought them. The emphasis is on the result. So completed one-time action, perfective verb. And then another time when you're going to use perfective verbs is when you're describing actions of short duration. And the emphasis is on doing something for a little bit. So there's a strong emphasis on doing something for a short duration. And you're often going to use a perfective verb with words like быстро or быстренько, quickly, немного or немножко, a little bit, тут же, here and now, or сразу, right away. For example, я быстренько прочитала статью. I quickly read through the article. Я немножко поспала. I slept for a little bit or I took a little nap. You are also going to use perfective verbs when you are emphasizing the completion of the action or the result of the action. And in this situation, you're often going to see them combined with the phrase наконец or наконец-то, which means finally. For example, ты прочитал «Войну и мир»? Have you finished reading War and Peace? Да, наконец-то прочитал. Yes, I finally finished reading it. And then finally, we're going to use perfective verbs when we indicate success. So to go back to our two aspectual pairs that we talked about on the last slide, поступать, поступить, and сдавать, сдать. When we use the perfective members of the pairs, we indicate success. So поступить в университет is to get into college. Поступать в университет is to apply to college. Поступить в университет is to get into college. Similarly, while сдавать экзамен is to take an exam, сдать экзамен is to pass an exam. So you could say, for instance, я поступал в университет, а не поступил. I applied to college, but I didn't get in. Or я сдавала экзамен, а не сдала. I took the exam, but I didn't pass it. Finally, let's talk a little bit about simultaneous versus consecutive actions. When we are describing two or more simultaneous actions, we are going to use imperfective verbs. For instance, когда я занимался, я слушал музыку. When I was studying, I listened to music. Or я завтракала и читала новости. I was eating breakfast and reading the news. We have two simultaneous actions with no indication of beginning or end. There's no indication of result. We're just focused on two simultaneous processes. So we have two imperfective verbs. Conversely, we're going to use perfective verbs to describe consecutive actions. So, for example, я встала, приняла душ, позавтракала и пошла на занятия. I got up, took a shower, had breakfast, and set off for my classes. We have a series of completed one-time consecutive actions, so we're going to use a series of perfective verbs. Or, for instance, я прочитал книгу и написал эссе. I finished reading the book, I read through the book, and wrote the essay. First, I finished reading the book, and then I finished writing the essay. Two consecutive completed actions. And finally, if we want to describe an action, one action that interrupts another ongoing action, the verb to describe the interrupting action is going to be perfective, And the verb that describes the background action, the ongoing background action, is going to be imperfective. For example, когда я завтракал, мама позвонила. While I was having breakfast, mom called me. So завтракать is imperfective. So while I was having breakfast, we have this sort of background description of an ongoing process. And then mama позвонила, my mom called. Perfective. All of a sudden, we have this completed action that interrupts the background ongoing process. And so that is a short overview of using verbal aspect in the past tense. I'm sure it seems like a lot. Remember, we don't expect you to master verbal aspect right away. That is completely not possible. So you just want to keep exposing yourself to it and keep thinking about these guidelines and learn to use it more and more and become more and more familiar with it. And eventually it will start to make sense. But there's no expectation that you're going to be a perfect master of verbal aspect right away. You just want to learn these guidelines and start using them in your use of aspect.